Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive that might just change how you look at the world. Things are a little crazy right now, and I think it's safe to say that the economy is something that's on all of our minds lately.
Absolutely. And not just like what we see in the headlines, right? But
Yeah.
the deeper forces that are at play.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're going to tackle today, the economy and the deeper forces at play.
Yeah, you're in the right place because we're going to unpack Ray Dalio's insights today.
We've got a lot of great material to pull from, too. We'll be referencing some of his YouTube interviews, his book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order.
Oh, and even some snippets from his audiobook.
Yes, exactly. So much good stuff. And we're doing this because I know a lot of us are feeling uncertain right now.
Yeah.
Inflation is still kind of lingering around, and global tensions seem to be rising, you
Right.
know?
It's a crazy time.
But what if instead of just feeling overwhelmed and, kind of powerless, we had a framework to understand these shifts?
Right.
That's our goal today, to give you that Dalio lens to look through.
Yeah. And he starts with what he calls the economic machine. Okay, no, don't worry. We're not going to get all textbooky here.
Yeah, please no.
But the fascinating thing is how Dalio really emphasizes the role of credit in this machine.
Okay, so it's not just about buying and selling.
It's not just that.
It's also about how much we're borrowing to do all that buying and selling.
Exactly. And that's where his idea, the short-term debt cycle, comes in.
Okay.
Think about it like a wave that we're riding every 5 to 8 years.
We're all surfers.
They're all surfers, yeah.
Exactly.
So the economy expands. People are feeling good.
But spending money.
You have more money, and then boom, inflation hits.
Makes sense.
So what happens? Central banks got to raise interest rates.
Ouch. Yeah, my mortgage lender will tell you all about that.
Exactly. And suddenly borrowing is way more expensive.
Yeah.
So people and businesses, they start to pull back a little bit.
They have to.
Spending slows down, and then we might even dip into a recession.
And then we do it all over again.
And then the cycle starts over.
So we go from this, feeling flush with cash to feeling the pinch. And it's all thanks to this wave of credit.
Precisely. But here's the kicker. Each cycle seems to end with even more debt than the one before.
Oh, no. So we just keep piling it on.
It's human nature. We love to buy now and pay later. But this leads us to an even bigger cycle. The Dalio talks about the long-term debt cycle.
Oh, this sounds a little scary.
This one plays out over 75 to 100 years. And this is where things can get really interesting and maybe a little scary.
Okay, I'm ready. I think, break it down for me. How is this long-term cycle different from these little ups and downs that we're feeling right now? The day-to-day stuff.
Imagine debt just building up for decades. First, everything still looks great. The stock market is booming. People's incomes are rising. Everyone's feeling wealthy.
Okay.
Think about it like a giant bubble, just slowly inflating.
So we all get complacent because things feel good for so long.
Exactly. But remember, it's all built on this mountain of debt. And eventually that debt has to be repaid. And when it grows faster than our incomes, people are forced to cut back on spending. That's when the bubble pops.
That doesn't sound good. And is that what happened in 2008?
You got 2008 financial crisis was a classic example of hitting that long-term debt peak. And, this isn't just a recent thing. We saw this in Japan in 1989.
Wow.
And in the U.S. in the 1929 Great Depression.
History repeating itself. So what happens next? How do we get out of this mess?
Dalio lays out 4 main ways his system tries to rebalance after this bubble burst. He tells them the 4 levers of deleveraging, and the first is austerity.
Okay, so that's where governments, businesses, and even, average people like me, and you start tightening our belts and cutting back on spending.
Exactly. But that can backfire because as incomes drop, spending drops even further. It's like trying to stop a leak by tossing buckets of water overboard.
Not very effective. What about the second lever?
That would be debt reduction.
Yeah.
Defaults, restructurings, borrowers can't pay back what they owe, and lenders take the hit. It's the depression phase. Banks get squeezed. Asset values plummet. Remember the housing market crash in 2008?
Yeah, I definitely remember that, not fondly. What are the other 2 levers?
So the third lever is wealth redistribution. Governments might increase taxes on the wealthy, trying to generate more revenue. It can help. But historically, it also creates social tension. Think about the political climate today. Wealth inequality is huge right now.
It's a recipe for instability, for sure. What's the final lever?
This one's probably the most talked about: printing money. That's the central bank's big tool to try and stimulate the economy.
Okay.
They create new money, and they use it to buy assets or government bonds.
But doesn't that lead to inflation, which we were trying to avoid in the first place?
It's a delicate balance. Too much money printing, and you get runaway inflation, but too little. and the economy stagnates. 2008 was a prime example of this lever being used, and we're seeing it again today.
So these four levers are the tools used to try and fix things after a debt bubble bursts.
It's messy. There's no easy solution, but
Yeah.
Understanding these levers gives you a much clearer picture of what's happening and why.
Definitely. Okay, so we've got these cycles playing out driven by credit and debt,
Right.
but Dalio takes it a step further, and this is where things get mind-blowing.
Yeah.
He connects these cycles to the rise and fall of empires throughout history.
He spent years analyzing 500 years worth of data.
Wow.
8 key indicators of power. Things like education, innovation, military strength, reserve currency status. He wasn't just looking at economics. He was looking at cultural and geopolitical trends.
So he's arguing that these economic cycles that we've been talking about are actually tied to a bigger cycle of empires rising, peaking, and then declining.
Exactly, and he found this cycle typically lasts around 250 years. Empires rise, they enjoy their time at the top, and then eventually they decline in remarkably similar ways.
250 years. That's a long time. So how does this relate to what's happening today? I mean, are we in the middle of one of these empire shifts right now?
It's the question Dalio is trying to answer. He definitely sees parallels between past empires and what's happening on the world stage right now. And specifically, he highlights the U.S. and China as being at a crucial point in this cycle.
So he's suggesting we might be witnessing a power shift
Potentially.
from this, U.S.-led world order to something new with China playing a much bigger role.
That's one interpretation. Yes, he doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he presents a framework for understanding how power dynamics shift over time. And his analysis suggests we could be in for some major changes in the coming decades.
This is getting intense. Okay, can we break this empire cycle down a bit more? How does it actually play out? Like, where do we even begin?
Well, usually it starts with a new order being established after some major conflict, kind of a reset button. Then you see a period of peace and prosperity. Think of it as the honeymoon phase.
Okay, I'm a little nervous about where this is going. What happens after the honeymoon phase is over?
The empire focuses on education and innovation. They become this dominant force in global trade, and their currency often becomes the global reserve currency. Does this sound familiar?
It does sound a bit like the U.S., but this is where the seeds of decline are planted, right?
Exactly. Even as the empire is at its peak, things start to shift. Competition heats up, internal divisions widen, and there's this tendency towards overconsumption, fueled by, you guessed it, debt.
We get addicted to easy credit, living beyond our means. Sounds familiar.
It's happened so many times throughout history, and eventually it catches up. The wealth gap widens. Political polarization intensifies. Maintaining the empire just becomes more and more expensive, especially militarily.
So it starts to crumble from within.
Exactly, and that's when things get really dicey. Because as the dominant power weakens, rivals start to see an opportunity to challenge them.
And that's where the risk of conflict comes in.
Historically, yes. When a declining empire is challenged by a rising power, tensions escalate. And this brings us to one of Dalio's most interesting ideas: the dollar's exorbitant privilege.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but I'm not exactly sure what it means. Can you explain it?
It refers to this unique advantage that the U.S. has enjoyed because the dollar is the world's reserve currency.
Yo.
Since global trade is mostly done in dollars, other countries need to hold large reserves of them.
Makes sense.
This lets the U.S. borrow money more easily and more cheaply than others.
So it's like having a superpower in the financial world.
Exactly. But Dalio warns that this privilege can also lead to overborrowing and complacency. It's easy to get hooked on that cheap credit and ignore the underlying problems.
Okay, so you're saying the mighty dollar might not be so mighty forever.
Dalio believes we can't take its status for granted. The rise of alternative currencies, including digital ones like China's ECNY, could challenge the dollar's dominance.
So this exorbitant privilege could actually become a liability.
It's a possibility he wants us to consider, and that leads us to the crucial question. If the dollar's dominance fades, what happens next? What does this mean for all of us?
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Yeah.
This has all been super fascinating, but it's also a little overwhelming. What's the takeaway for me for our listeners?
The first step is awareness by understanding these cycles and what drives them. You're already ahead of the game. It allows you to see the big picture and make more informed decisions.
So knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about empowering yourself to navigate these forces. And we'll delve deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive. What does all this mean for you, for your finances, and for your future?
Okay, I think I'm ready for part two. Okay, I'm still processing everything from part one, but I think I'm ready to go even deeper. We talked about these historical cycles of debt and empires,
Right.
but what I'm really curious about is what Dalio has to say about the potential for future conflict.
Mhm.
This is where it starts to feel less like a history lesson and more like a warning.
You're right there. Dalio is definitely trying to warn us about potential pitfalls based on what's happened in the past.
Okay.
And he's very clear. When you have a declining empire,
Which he sees the U.S. as being in right now.
yeah, and a rising empire like China, the risk of conflict goes way up.
But why? What makes conflict more likely in this kind of situation? Is it just about who has the bigger economy?
It's definitely more nuanced than that. Dalio points to a few key drivers.
Yeah.
And, declining economic power is one of them. As an empire's economic strength weakens,
Yeah.
it's less able to, project its influence globally. And that creates a vacuum that rising powers want to fill.
So it's like a power struggle
Yeah,
on a global scale.
a global power struggle.
And I can see how China's rapid growth over the past few decades has put them in a position to challenge the U.S.
For sure. And this economic competition often spills over into other areas too, like technology and military strength.
Yeah.
Think about the race to develop, cutting edge technologies like AI and 5G, or the military buildup we're seeing in the South China Sea. These are all signs of this power dynamic playing out in real time.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of unnerving to see it happening right in front of us.
It's not just headlines anymore.
It's a real shift in the global balance of power.
It is. And Dalio doesn't shy away from these tough conversations.
Yeah.
He also highlights the role of internal divisions, within empires as a contributing factor to conflict.
So he's saying that as empires decline, they often become more politically polarized and socially fragmented.
Exactly.
Like we were talking about wealth inequality earlier and how that can create resentment and instability.
That's part of it, but it's also about a loss of shared identity and purpose.
Right.
When a country is divided against itself, it's harder to present a united front on the world stage, and it becomes more susceptible to external challenges.
It's like that old saying, a house divided against itself cannot stand.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that playing out in a lot of countries right now, including the U.S.
It's a worrying trend, and it makes cooperating on global issues much harder. Think about climate change or pandemics. These are challenges that need countries to work together to solve.
Right.
But when everyone's focused on their internal problems, it's really hard to find common ground.
So internal conflict weakens a country, making it more vulnerable to outside threats.
Yeah.
And it also makes it harder to work with others to solve problems that affect everyone.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Dalio is saying we need more cooperation, not just to prevent conflict, but to deal with these huge global problems.
Absolutely. He argues that countries need to find ways to work together, even if they have different, political systems or economic interests.
That sounds incredibly challenging, especially with all the distrust and competition between countries like the U.S. and China.
It's tough, for sure. But Dalio believes it's essential, if we want to avoid catastrophic conflict.
Right.
He says countries need to recognize their shared interests, things like global stability and preventing nuclear proliferation.
So finding those areas of common ground, even when there's rivalry and competition.
Exactly. He also suggests that, we need better systems for dialogue and conflict resolution. Instead of resorting to military force, we need to figure out ways to address disagreements peacefully through diplomacy and negotiation.
I think we can all agree that avoiding conflict between nuclear-armed powers should be a top priority.
100%. Dalio isn't saying conflict is inevitable, but he wants us to be aware of the risks and, take steps to reduce those risks.
Okay, so we've talked about what makes conflict more likely, in a world with declining and rising empires. But what can countries actually do to reduce this risk? Does Dalio offer any strategies?
He does. He really emphasizes the importance of clear communication and transparency.
Okay.
Countries need to be upfront about their intentions and avoid actions that could be misinterpreted as hostile.
So avoid misunderstandings that could lead to something more serious.
Yeah, he also says that countries need to respect each other's core interests.
Yeah.
Recognizing that each country has legitimate concerns about security and economic priorities.
It sounds like this requires a real shift in mindset, moving away from this us versus them thinking.
I agree. Dalio advocates for a more cooperative approach, one where countries realize they can benefit from working together even if they don't agree on everything.
So finding win-win solutions.
Yes.
Instead of constantly trying to, outmaneuver each other or undermine each other.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key point. Dalio makes the importance of strong alliances. In a world where power is more spread out, alliances are even more important.
Strength in numbers, right? But what kind of alliances are we talking about here? Just military or something more?
Dalio sees the need for all sorts of partnerships. Economic, diplomatic, even cultural ties. He says countries need to work together to build a more stable and prosperous world.
That sounds like a pretty big goal.
It is.
Especially given all the stuff going on in the world right now.
It is a big goal, but it's one worth striving for. And it highlights how important it is for everyone to work together.
Individuals. Businesses. To build a more peaceful and prosperous future.
I completely agree. Dalio emphasizes that we all have a role to play in shaping the future. And while there are real challenges, he also believes that we have the power to create a better world.
That's a good message. That's a message of hope, and that's something we could all use right now. But I want to shift gears for a second and talk about something a little more concrete. Dalio offers some practical advice on how people can deal with these crazy times.
Right.
How to prepare for these potential economic and geopolitical shocks.
Yeah.
What are some of his key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, he's a huge advocate for diversification.
Okay.
Both in your investments and your life choices. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Spread your risk.
So don't bet everything on one asset class or one industry or even one country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He also emphasizes having a long-term perspective. Don't get caught up in the day-to-day ups and downs of the market or the constant news cycle. Focus on building a solid financial foundation that can handle the tough times.
That's good advice. But what about those of us who aren't, financial wizards?
Right.
Are there some simple things that we can all do to protect ourselves?
Dalio suggests, having an emergency fund,
Okay.
a diversified portfolio of investments, and just staying informed about what's happening globally. He also says it's super important to be adaptable and resilient.
Okay.
Be able to adjust to changing situations.
So be prepared, stay informed, and be flexible.
Exactly. But you bring up a good point. What about the mental and emotional side of all this?
Yeah.
Living in uncertain times can be really stressful.
Absolutely.
Dalio is a big believer in things like mindfulness and meditation. He finds that those practices help him stay calm and focused, even in really tough situations.
So taking care of our mental and emotional health is just as important as taking care of our finances.
100%. He also talks about having a strong support system, people you can count on when things are difficult.
Friends, family, community, a good therapist.
Exactly. And he also encourages people to stay involved in the political process. He believes that informed citizens can make a difference in shaping a better future.
Okay. So there's a lot to think about here, but I think the main takeaway is that while we can't control everything that happens in the world,
right,
we can control how we respond. And by understanding these forces that are at play, we can make better choices and hopefully create a better future for ourselves and for future generations.
I agree.
Wow, we have really gone deep on this one.
We have.
From economic cycles to the rise and fall of empires, and even, I like the potential for future conflict. It's a lot.
It's a lot to take in.
One of the things that's really stuck with me about Dalio's work is how he uses history as a guide, not just for understanding the past, but also for understanding the present and the future.
It's not just about looking back. It's about using those historical patterns to figure out what's happening right now.
Right.
And what might happen next, and what I find really empowering about his approach, is that he doesn't see us as just passive observers. He thinks we can shape the future.
Both individually and collectively.
Yeah, that's a key takeaway for me, too. He acknowledges these historical cycles, but he doesn't think the future is set in stone. Our choices matter.
So it's not about predicting the future perfectly, with like 100% certainty.
Right.
But it's about understanding these forces that are at play and making decisions.
Making informed choices.
That can steer us towards a better outcome.
Exactly. And that requires us to be, engaged, informed, and willing to really challenge our assumptions.
Challenge what we think we know.
Dalio encourages us to be open-minded. To consider all these different perspectives.
Right.
And to be willing to change our minds when we see new information.
So it's a call to be, active learners, to embrace the complexity of the world and be adaptable when things change. And, I think that's especially important today. When it's so easy to get stuck in our own little bubbles.
Yeah, our echo chambers.
Yeah, exactly. And filter out anything that, challenges what we already believe.
It's true. It's more important than ever to seek out different perspectives, to really talk to people who see things differently than we do.
Have those hard conversations.
Have those conversations and be willing to learn from each other.
Dalio talks about this idea of an idea meritocracy,
Yes.
where the best ideas win.
Regardless of where they come from or who's presenting them.
It's about creating a space where people feel comfortable challenging the way things are.
Right, and presenting new ideas without feeling like they're going to get shut down.
Exactly. So it's not just about being open-minded. It's about actively seeking out the best ideas,
Yeah.
even if they challenge what we think we know.
Mm-hmm. And that takes a certain level of humility,
Yeah.
admitting that we might be wrong
Being wrong is okay.
and that other people might have, really valuable things to offer.
We've talked a lot about these big forces,
Yeah.
these like big systemic forces.
But I want to bring it back down to a personal level.
Right.
For our listeners, what are some things we can all do, as individuals to navigate this really complex economic and geopolitical landscape?
Yeah.
Dalio offers some advice in his work, right?
He does. And as we touched on earlier, diversification is a huge theme. He encourages people to spread their risk.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket across different asset classes, industries, even countries.
So don't just focus on your home country.
Yeah.
But what does that look like practically? Can you give us some examples?
Sure, it could mean investing in a mix of stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities.
Right.
It could also mean having a globally diversified portfolio, not just focusing on your home country. And it could even mean developing different streams of income, so you're not relying on just one job or one source of income.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's about creating a safety net.
Exactly, a more resilient foundation. Yeah.
Yeah, a foundation that can weather the storm. But what about the mental and emotional side of things? It's one thing to diversify your investments, but how do we handle all the stress and anxiety that comes with, living in a time when things feel so uncertain?
That's a great question. And, Dalio is a big advocate for mindfulness and meditation.
Oh, yeah.
He finds that these practices help him stay calm, centered and focused, even when things are really chaotic.
So it's about taking care of your mind and your emotions,
Yeah,
not just your money.
Exactly. He also talks about, having a good support system, people you can lean on when things are tough.
Your friends, your family, your mentors, supportive community.
Absolutely. And he encourages people to, focus on what they can control. We can't control everything that happens in the world, but we can control how we react to it.
So let go of the things you can't control and focus on what you can influence. That's it. And it's also about, finding meaning and purpose in your life, even when things are crazy. Dalio believes that having a sense of purpose can make you stronger and more resilient.
I love that it's about finding something bigger than yourself, to believe in something that gives you, direction and motivation. And I think that's a really powerful message, especially when it seems like so many people are feeling lost.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it all comes back to Dalio's main point.
Yeah.
We have the power to shape the future. It's not going to be easy. There will be challenges.
Yeah.
But by understanding these forces, making good choices and working together, we can make things better.
It's a message of hope, a call to action, and a reminder that we're all in this together.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
This has been an awesome conversation.
Yeah, it has.
Yes, thanks for walking us through Dalio's work.
Of course.
And helping us understand it all.
It's been my pleasure. And, the learning doesn't stop here. Keep asking questions and keep trying to make a positive impact.
Great advice. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it interesting, and we'll see you next time.